live, Sisa.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us.
Welcome, everyone.
Should we wait till 12:15?
Exactly. Yeah, we'll wait till 12:15 to begin, but we wanted to open up the link. Please introduce yourself in the chat if you're out there listening. Unfortunately, we can't see faces today, so we'd love to know who's here and maybe what you're teaching next year.
Where you're from.
Where you're from would be great.
Oh, hi, Alicia. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Antigua. That's in the north, right? Northern California. I think so.
Yes, Isa's actually from California.
I am. Yeah. I might be wrong though.
We're in Chicago. We're coming at you from Chicago now, so we should clarify. But she did grow up in California.
Ventura, nice. Transitional kindergarten. Vancouver, Washington, awesome.
Oh.
San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Philip. Rosa Corral from, hi Rosa, everybody. Los Angeles.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you for introducing yourselves.
Yes, thank you. Dallas, Texas.
Oh, hi, Chicago.
Yeah. San Jose.
We have there's a session this afternoon in Spanish that's happening from our colleagues at Erickson. So we hope you're able to check that out.
Georgia, awesome. New Jersey, all right. Got people from all over.
Well,
Santa Rosa. Parachute, Colorado, nice. Anaheim, Sacramento. Oh, homeschool advisor teacher. Italy, cool. Oregon.
Oh, wow.
Arcadia. Sorry I'm not getting everybody. They're flying by pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, technical difficulties. Well, hopefully.
We have someone here who's hopefully able to help you out.
Yes.
And it's 12:15, Zisa, so we can get started.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. We're so glad you're here. Rocky and I are coaches through Erickson Institute, early childhood coaches. And the Erickson Institute, in case you don't know, is a graduate school focused on early childhood development and education. So that's ages birth to 8 years old. And we really like to emphasize that we also do professional learning for in-service teachers. So here we're going to focus on equity and helping to understand a routine that promotes that. We have been working with kindergarten teachers from across the state of Illinois to implement this instructional routine for the last 2 years. So we're really excited to help you know more about this. Rocky, I'm trying to move the next slide.
Let's see if I can get it. Here it comes.
Thank you. Oh, wait, go back for a second. Sorry. In the chat, if you could type, what does equity look like and sound like to you? In math, specifically. Oh, welcome. What kinds of things come to mind when you're thinking about equity in math? Thanks, Kofi from San Jose. Okay, well, maybe I'll just jump in with some ideas. Okay, so when we think about equity and math, we're thinking about this persistent myth that math is, thank you, Kendra, that math is just abstract and without any kind of cultural relevance. And But actually, math often has a Eurocentric focus, and which means it's just focused on European ways of knowing and doing. And so when in reality, children of the global majority often show their learning and their math skills brilliantly through their funds of knowledge. And our task as educators is to be able to shift our focus so that we can see their brilliance through their funds of knowledge instead of our current lens. So when we think about that, it can be pretty overwhelming to think about equity in terms of math in general. But if we think about power and who has power in your class, that might help us think about this a little bit more easily. So we can think about access. We want to provide children access to their learning, the materials. We can think about how we can learn through multiple modalities and to be able to show their learning in multiple ways and access the material in multiple ways. If we incorporate joy and play, it'll be much easier for children to persist when they come upon things that are challenging. And we think about oppressive structures and systems and their implementation. We often cite rigor as the reason to do away with the joy and play, when really we all need joy and play because that's just what is how we best serve children in general. It's developmentally appropriate and necessary for learning. We want it to be cognitively demanding. So we might ask, how is that different than rigor? And here, what I think of is the high ceiling, low floor kind of opportunities for children to show where they are and access the material in their own way. So that doesn't mean it's too advanced or too rigorous. It's just that it's developmentally appropriate, which I see a lot of in the chat about having understanding different ways of showing how they learn. So that's the beauty of multiple entry points, and they can access it in their own way and make it challenging as is appropriate for them. So when I mentioned funds of knowledge, that's the knowledge that comes from their homes, their families, their communities, and they're able to represent their true selves in their learning. So the more we can integrate that and embrace both that learning at home and learning in school, the easier identity building is for them because they don't have to choose which person they're going to be that day, or, if they're going to have one identity at school versus at home. Culturally relevant ways in which we think about the content is meaningful to them. And then when we think about funds of knowledge and cultural relevance, we'll be able to help them see themselves in the classroom and in math and help them build their math identity. Lastly, agency and voice empowers children to be able to lead their own learning, share themselves in their learning. And with these instructional strategies, we're hoping that you'll be able to see what children can do and where their strengths are, and let that shine through instead of all the things they can't do. So there is a framework called I See You Care. It's developed by Pamela Sita and Kendall Brown. And it's helpful to see equity in this framework, and it overlaps with much of the things that we just talked about. So for example, release control, that might be related to agency and voice, letting go of our own ways of doing things and let the children lead. We might also see about building relationships with children, understanding them well, so that they can understanding who they are, who their families are, and integrating that into the classroom will help you build that identity and equity framework in your math class. So we're going to think about these things in terms of the instructional routine that we'll talk about, called Numberless word problems. And this is referenced in the handout that we created and is on the website. I'm going to pass it to Rocky, and she's going to help us think about this routine.
Okay, so let's do some math together. Here is a very traditional math story, right? It says a flock of 9 geese were flying 2 geese stopped to rest. So how many geese are still flying, right? So I want you in the chat to just rate how engaged you are with this word problem. 1 being you're pretty much falling asleep, or 5 being you're jumping out of your seat. How engaged are you when you hear this word problem? And as you're thinking about that, I want to critique this from the lens of storytelling or literacy, right? When you're reading a good story, what are some elements that keep you engaged? Usually there's a hook that you're interested in. There's no hook, right? In this story, there's no real suspense. It's kind of lacking visuals. It's really doesn't really give me much of a reason to care about solving this problem. And it may or may not be connected, right, to my life. So I'm seeing in the chat lots of 1s and 2s and 3s. Yeah, it's not super engaging. It's pretty dry. So when students have a lot of experiences like these kinds of word problems, they kind of come to believe that making sense of the problem is not needed, right? What they do, and we all have, I'm sure, experienced this, is they simply grab 2 numbers and then they add them together, right? And that's how we set them up to be very fast answer getters. But we are not helping support them as problem solvers, right? And we're thinking about that. We're thinking about this from an equity lens, which means how can we actually engage them, right? How can we think about really supporting them as problem solvers? So these students haven't been given much agency when they get a problem like this. And I'll probably, if I'm the teacher in this classroom, I'll probably hear from 1 or 2 of the same students that I always hear from. And for that reason, we think it's time to rethink word problems. So I want us to take a look at a powerful instructional strategy called numberless word problems. Numberless word problems. So what's the goal of a numberless word problem? Well, as the name suggests, you are going to present the word problem, but without any numbers or quantities, which may sound a little wacky, but it'll make sense as we go through today. So of course the quantities and the numbers are eventually revealed to the students, but it's not until they've had a chance to make sense of it, to discuss it, and to have some conversation around sense making. So at Erickson's Early Math Collaborative, we have a saying. We often say, all operations tell a story. And what we mean by that is that numbers in isolation just are not serving young children, right? There's always an opportunity to embed them in a story. The other goal of numberless word problems is there's really an emphasis on thinking rather than fast answer getting, right? And we mentioned this earlier. The emphasis in numberless math stories is on reasoning, on strategy building, on conversation, and the emphasis is on the quality of problem solving versus the quantity. Instead of asking students to solve maybe 5 or 10 word problems, we're asking students to solve 1. So a good metaphor to think about is we're asking students to swim deeper versus swimming across a pool. And as my colleague Sisa talked about, we talked about what does equity look like, right, and sound like in the classroom. Well, numberless word problems, we think, is a powerful tool when you are trying to bring more equity into your math classroom, because it really does significantly boost engagement and persistence for every single student in your classroom. Another goal connected to equity is access. And a lot of you mentioned that in the chat when we asked you what equity means to you, right? Access to challenging problem solving, going back to cognitively demanding, right? And what Sisa also mentioned about a low floor and a high ceiling. We want all children to have an entry point, no matter where they're at in their mathematical thinking. But we also want the ceiling to be high, meaning we want students to reach their potential so they can always be increasing their sophistication in math and problem solving. And this Numberless Math Story sets that up for you, for your students. So it has a lot to offer students. So let's compare the lackluster sort of word problem, the geese problem that I introduced in the previous slide, to taking that exact same word problem about the flock of geese flying and then a set removed, same exact word problem that we all said the engagement was pretty low. Let's see how that looks in a kindergarten classroom when you present it as a numberless word problem. So we have a video that we want to share with you of a kindergarten class doing this together. This video will introduce numberless word problems, and then we'll talk more about what do you do after that. And I want you to watch very carefully for something that we call the slow reveal. And I want you also to think about, how does the teacher engage the students in making sense of the problem?
Okay, kindergarten. What do you see in this picture? A bird. Oh, a bird. What else do you see?
Clouds.
You know what I've noticed? A lot of you guys are calling it an eagle or a bird. It absolutely is a bird. This is a goose. Yeah, and when we have more than one goose, we call them geese. And when geese fly together, it's called a flock. So if you look up at the sky and you see a bunch of geese flying together, you might say, oh, look at that flock of geese.
It's not of the E.
It has the E sound in it, you're right. So kindergarten, can I tell you something about this flock of geese? I'm going to wait until Ayana joins our team and gets on the floor. Okay, kindergarten, look right here. A flock of geese were flying, and some of them stopped to rest. Why would they stop to rest? Ayana, on the floor, and then I'm going to call on you. Crisscross. Ayana, why would they stop to rest?
Because they're tired of flying.
They're tired of flying.
Because they fly all day.
They probably did fly all day. They probably are really tired. How many geese do you think are in that flock? How many geese do you think are in that flock? Damien?
19.
19. How many geese do you think are in the flock? Sama? 20. How many geese do you think are in that flock? Sharvika? 2. How many geese do you think are in that flock, Cooper? 10. Okay, well, let me show you. Oh, kindergarten, it says a flock of 9 geese were flying. How many geese?
9.
How many geese?
9.
A flock of 9 geese were flying. Can you show me 9 on your fingers?
I want to make 9 like this.
Kindergarten, a flock of 9 geese were flying, but some of them stopped to rest. How many do you think stopped to rest? Because like Ayana said, they were really tired. Karen, how many think stopped to rest? 5. She thinks 5 stopped. Paisley, how many do you think?
6.
6. How many do you think stopped? Stephania? 8. One more. How many do you think stopped? Angie? 3. Oh, I forgot. When they stopped to rest, where did they go? How did they rest? Did they just stop in the middle of the air?
No.
Greta, what did they do?
It might have went down to the ground
Could have landed on something. What could they have landed on? Jason? Water. What else could they have landed on, Sean?
Nest.
A nest. What else could they have landed on? Evan?
Ground.
The ground, just the regular ground. Aiden?
They could have landed on a building.
They could have landed on a building. Let me tell you something else about our geese. Okay, kindergarten, here's some more information. A flock of 9 geese were flying, and 2 stopped to rest. How many geese were flying? 9. How many stopped to rest?
2.
How many geese were flying?
9.
How many stop to rest? Okay, so I'm gonna let you, oh, turn to me now. I'm over here now. I went to a new place. In just a minute, I'm gonna ask you to get your math journals. And you're gonna draw me a picture of the story. We've got cubes out all over the floor that you can use. You can draw a picture. And I'm gonna move our 10 frame paddles up to the front of the room because you can choose those too. Okay?
Okay.
Think for just a minute about the tool you're gonna use. Think for just a minute about the tool you're gonna use.
Discover La Roche-Posay and Thelio.
Okay, so I know sometimes it can be hard to catch dialogue in a video that we're streaming. So we're gonna break down sort of how that example in a kindergarten classroom emulates sort of numberless word problems. So let's talk about sort of some of her teaching moves and how is this related to equity. First of all, I hope you all noticed how much emphasis was placed on making sense of the story, right? What's a flock of geese? Why might they need to rest? Where would they go if they need to rest? Oh, they'll separate from the flock, right? That's a really important part of understanding a subtraction model, that there's a set and then that set changes. So she really spends quite a bit of time letting them make sense of that. There's lots of opportunities for kids to talk to each other about that. So I want you to, I want to make sure that that's in the forefront of your mind. And of course, she goes back to, I think I need to go to my next slide. There we go. The first thing to keep in mind about numberless word problems is that she shares the story with the whole class through, in this case, a picture. Some folks use a short video, but there's a visual, a big visual that really engages students' interest. The story is shared that way to ensure that, you know, if you have emergent bilinguals in your classroom, they will benefit greatly from having this visual. If you have auditory processing needs in the classroom, then a visual will also be powerful. And we know that young children greatly benefit from multimodal processing. So in this case, she had a visual, she had a lot of conversation, and she asked them to use a kinesthetic finger modality as well. Second thing to keep in mind is that we want to remove the question from the mathematical story or situation. So it really just started with a flock of geese were flying, right? Very, very general, starting out with that beginning of the story. The third item that she sort of does is the quantities are completely removed, right? In fact, she asks the students, how many geese might there be in this flock? Because she's going to learn a lot from asking them if they have an idea of how many would be a realistic amount of geese in a flock. And then she asks them, well, what do you think? How many geese do you think left the flock, right? Again, she's getting a lot of great assessment by getting them to tell her what makes sense to them. Fourth, this idea in numberless word problems of then, the next step is inserting what we call soft words, such as some or few. So for example, it says in her presentation, a flock of geese were flying. The next reveal was some stopped to rest. And then she asks them to think about how many might have. The last element that's pretty essential to numberless word problems is this idea of a slow reveal. So that means each piece of new information is slowly revealed, one after the next, to give children a chance to process each piece of it. And it's always embedded with discussion between each reveal. So you can see how numberless math stories are presented through an approach that invites all the students into problem solving. This is simply how you introduce numberless math stories. At the end of the video, she mentions to the students, right, make a choice about what tool you might want to use to solve the problem. And then she says, think about that. How are you going to go now and solve the problem? So this is the next piece of it, and I'm going to pass it to Cisa. She's going to give you some information about how do students go about doing that.
All right, everybody. We're going to take a look at this framework that helps us understand child-centered problem solving. So when I think about models, we think about that in terms of a noun. So they might show it concretely, pictorially, or symbolically. Concretely can be with some of those physical kind of tools. Pictorially would be drawing on paper. Symbolically would be using numerals or equations with the models. The tools are physical items or some kind of, or as I explained with the models, they can use the tools to represent their thinking. It's a way to show their thinking, but not actually do the thinking for them, if that makes sense. And we'll talk about the other part that will illustrate their thinking. But the tools could be cubes, fingers, drawings, number paths, 10 frames, or a variety of other kinds of tools like that. I was going to say about the models is that it's how they represent their thinking, whereas strategies are that how they think about the problem, how they think about the story, and I'll talk about that in more detail in a minute. But if you're thinking about counting all, you might be counting all of the cubes, for example, or counting all their fingers to figure out the total. They could count on, say if they have 5 fingers, then they could start from 5 and count to 10 to get that final amount. They could also be reasoning with a number relationship. So a child might know that 1 more than 4 is 5. And that's using what they know about numbers and making a connection. Whereas they might just automatically know a number combination. They might know that 3 and 2 make 5. So I want to highlight this because this helps us understand the distinction and what it looks like when a child is leading their own learning. This is where the agency comes in, and it helps us to know what the children are thinking by going through each of these things. So we're wondering, when they're leading their own learning, how are they representing their thinking? How are they enacting the story? Is it concretely? Is it pictorially with pictures or marks on a paper? Are they symbolically using equations or numerals? And feel free to put any questions in the chat. We can always try to answer them as best we can. So let's see what this looks like. We're going to do a reader's theater between Rocky and I to show what this might look like. And then we can talk about some of these things like the tools and strategies and models. I'll be the teacher and Rocky will be the student. How are the tools pom-poms helping you think about the problem?
I counted them.
Which geese are resting?
Here, these 2.
How do you know?
There are 9 geese flying, and these 2 stopped to rest.
Wonderful. Thank you. So in the chat, feel free to type. You might not remember all of the details about the tools and all of those things, but in the chat, just type what you think are the tools, maybe a physical object or symbolically, what you're noticing in terms of the strategy. Are they counting all, counting on, number relationship, or just knowing a number combination? And then models. What do you see in terms of either concrete, pictorial, or symbolic that they're representing? And my understanding is the chat is a little bit delayed in terms of what we ask. So we might have to come back to this. Just trying to help you access your thinking. Rocky, what do you think if we go to the next one and then come back?
Go to the next one and we can always come back. I can always
Okay.
return back to this.
Okay. All
We
right.
have another example for you all.
Yes. Here's another vignette, and we'll play the same rules. And we'll ask you to do the same thing in a minute. So, Rocky, what is the 9 on the top of your board?
There are 9 geese flying.
Then what happened in the story?
2 went to rest.
Where do you think they went?
To a nest.
Oh, birds do that in the nest, huh? Now, how many geese are still flying?
So 7 geese are flying, and I know 7 and 2 more is 9.
Okay. So in the chat, you can go ahead and type what you think are the tools, strategies, and models. So the last one, let's go back to the last one. You see pom-poms are the tools. See some symbolic with some of the talking about some of the numbers maybe.
As people are noticing
Concrete is counting. Yes. Yep.
Dry erase.
Yes.
So a little bit of symbolic there.
Direct modeling with the pom-poms, and so concrete, yes. And then let's see.
Some are coming in for the second example, so I'll switch back to this one.
Let's switch back. Oh, so the strategy for, I'm going to go back to this one for a second, Rocky, sorry.
Yeah.
This one I would say is counting all. They counted the 9 geese and then counted 2 more.
Yeah.
Or counted 9 geese and then counted all of the pom-poms for the strategy. So for this one, I see the cubes. We see for cubes as the tool. We see concrete in terms of using the cubes, and then the numerals and equations to use for the symbolically. Yeah. So that part. And then in terms of strategy, they were using a number relationship. So they know that 7 and 2 more makes 9. So that's a 2 more than strategy. Yeah, wonderful. I think I saw a question about a number bond. This is a kindergarten classroom, so that's something that is introduced to their curriculum as a number bonds.
Yeah, I guess that's a perfect segue to say this is not a curriculum in and of itself. It's embedded into your own, whatever you're doing in your classroom. It'll just amplify sort of what kinds of strategies children are already working on in your classroom. So if you're working on number bonds, this might be something that students are able to practice.
Yeah, and this is a great way for the teacher to be able to assess what the children can know and do. So that, if they want to illustrate through number bonds, you can see that they have that down as a strategy, a way to illustrate their thinking. These were pretty straightforward. The children were able to explain their thinking and supply it in words, and it might not be so easy, especially when you first start doing this with kids. So you might need to probe a little bit to figure out what they know. But it's important to let them lead their learning here, because otherwise they're just illustrating that they can follow directions. So what you want is for them to have that agency and have that voice to say, this is what I know, and be really proud and excited about it. Yeah. So the last part is about class meeting. This is the way to wrap up numberless word problems. And here, does anybody use class meetings in their classrooms and maybe in other subjects? You can feel free to type that in the chat. And we'll come back to that. Sherry is wondering about a number bond in a relationship. So do you want to go ahead?
It's actually from a specific math curriculum, and maybe others use it too, but I know for sure it's used in a curriculum called Bridges. So that's where that's from. It's just a strategy that helps decompose numbers. So like there was a 9 and then there was a bond 2 sort of sticks, and then it said 7 and 2. That's all a number bond is. It's a fancy way of saying decomposing, basically.
Yeah. It just be able to show the relationship between them.
Yeah.
So in a number relationship is things like 1 more than, 1 less than, 2 more than, 2 less than a given number, and be able to make it automatically make connections that what the total might be. There might be also benchmarks to 5 and 10 that help you understand more about, help the child understand those important concepts. And that's the way actually to fluency. So it's a good bridge there. So in terms of class meetings, okay, I see a number of people do class meetings. Great, awesome. Oh, thanks, Phil, for putting in the chat about number bonds. So class meetings are a way for children to share their thinking with their peers and be able to demonstrate what they learned. So it's a great way to spread learning strategies, to be able to show their thinking, to provide inspiration. And I don't know if this happens in your classrooms, but in my classes when I was a teacher, the kids would be able to just explain things so much more easily to each other. They had like their own language, and than I ever could. Things seemed to make sense to them that way. And this is a perfect way to do that. So when we think about class meetings, we're thinking about making an intentional selection with the piece of work that you're going to choose, as well as the speaker who's going to present the work. And there's no perfect selection, but if you're really purposeful and intentional about it, then you'll be able to accomplish a lot of things in terms of your math goals, and then also in terms of elevating certain students. And when we think about elevation of certain kids, they might need it academically, socially, emotionally in terms of confidence. Maybe they need more visibility in the classroom. It helps with identity building. So if you're wondering what that means, maybe you have children who aren't chosen by others to play with or be partners with to do work in the classroom. Maybe they lack confidence. Maybe they aren't seen as smart or don't connect with their academic identity. And then lastly, you want to keep it short and brief, because they have short attention spans. So so we're going to show you what that looks like. Thanks, Rocky.
This is a bilingual classroom, so there's captions at the bottom, and it's kindergarten as well.
I was just going to say that. Sorry, Rocky.
No, go ahead, Cisa.
I was just going to say that the problem is slightly modified here. The teacher decided to do 9 geese flying and 4 stop to rest. So the teachers conferenced with each of the kids while they were problem solving to figure out who would be a purposeful selection in terms of the math, in terms of the speakers. And that's how she selected Joan and Rosalinda.
No. ¿Cuántos hay ahorita volando?
9.
Hay 9 gansos volando. ¿Los ven? ¿Cómo saben que hay 9? No. ¿Cómo saben que hay 9 aquí?
Falta uno más.
Porque uno está vacío, ¿verdad? Entonces Ulises dijo uno más. Entonces hay 9 patitos gansos volando. ¿Y qué pasó?
4 se cansó a tomar agua.
Y 4 se cansaron y se pararon a tomar agua. ¿Y entonces qué pasó ahora?
Están 5.
Y están 5 volando, ¿verdad? Ahora, miren cómo lo escribió. Ponlos aquí porque necesito tus manos para que nos expliques esto, por favor. Miren lo que hizo Joan. Pueden ver sus 9 gansos que estaban volando. ¿Y qué pasó? ¿Qué son estos taches que pusiste aquí?
X's.
Sí, son X's. ¿Y para qué quiere decir estas X?
Que no está volando.
¿Y cuántos no estaban volando porque se fueron a descansar? 4. Y entonces, ¿cuántos siguieron volando?
5.
Joan. Y 5 estaban volando. Y Joan, denle un aplauso a Joan. Muchas gracias,
I
Joan.
didn't do my fingers.
Tú también lo hiciste con tus dedos porque hiciste que tenías 9 volando. ¿Y cuántos se pararon a descansar, Joan?
4,
4. ¿Y entonces quedaron?
5.
5. También usó sus deditos, que es una muy buena herramienta. Ahora siéntate porque voy a invitar a Rosalinda. Rosalinda, tú usaste otro material. Rosalinda usó los cubos, hizo una torre. ¿Cuántos había en tu torre, Rosalinda? Ay, aquí está el papel de Rosalinda. ¿Cuántos había en tu torre? Porque tú hiciste una torre de ¿cuántos?
9.
9 cubos, ¿verdad? Y me ayudan a contar, por favor. Sé que está chiquito y lo ven desde lejos, pero voy a mover mi dedito. ¿Listos? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. ¿Y estos 9 qué son? Son los 9 que
Pajaritos
estaban ¿qué haciendo?
volando.
Volando. ¿Y luego qué pasó en tu cuento?
Se fueron los 4 a ir al jardín y donde están los árboles.
Se fueron al jardín donde estaban los árboles. Dijo que había 4. ¿Ven los 4 que se fueron? 1, 2, 3, 4. Esta fue la idea de Joan, que le dio a Rosalinda de usar las X para decir que estos fueron los que se fueron a descansar. Y entonces, ¿cuántos quedaron volando, Rosalinda?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Y falta este chiquito. A ver, vamos a contarlo juntas porque creo que no lo viste. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. ¿Cuántos siguieron volando? 5. Entonces, aquí podemos ver una manera de contar el cuento, como lo hizo Joan, y otra manera de contar el cuento, de que había 9 gansos volando, 4 se fueron a descansar, y entonces solamente quedaron 5 que siguieron volando. ¿Ok? Entonces, una manera de hacerlo es poner los 9 y de ese 9 quitarle los que se fueron. ¿Ok? Muchísimas gracias por todo su pensamiento. Dense un besito al cerebro.
Qué buen cerebro.
Okay, so hopefully that illustrates for you what a class meeting might look like. We would love to hear your thoughts around which elements of equity in math did we see? And you can type that in the chat. In the class meeting, as well as in the numberless word problems.
We know there's a little bit of a delay while you're thinking. So we wanted to also let you know, if you're interested in numberless word problems, we have created like a resource handout sheet that will be on our link, our bio link on the website. So I'll try to find that and give you the direct link. But I want to give you some time to think about what were some elements of equity that you saw and heard.
Okay, so we see identity building, access, visual. I think that might relate to access. So different modalities, agency and voice, joy, culturally relevant. Yeah, they were excited, weren't they, about showing their learning, about explaining their thinking, about understanding, really digging into the storytelling part, cognitively demanding, slow reveal, joy. Yeah. Okay, good. So glad that we saw all of this. In terms of culturally relevant, Rocky and I were having this discussion this morning about how culturally relevant can just be about what is in their communities. It isn't always just about ethnic culture, but it could be, but it could also be things related to what's in their world. So thank you for sharing all that. as Rocky mentioned, we do have a handout, and then we have some ideas about where you can find these numberless word problems. You can think about modifying your curriculum. There's photos from the classroom, the community, you choosing read alouds. There's a lot of math read alouds. You can use those. Any kind of relevant context that in their worlds, and make it meaningful for them. So you might want to find ways for them to show their worlds are in the math, and take baby steps. So we're so happy that you joined us today for this learning and finding ways to provide power and access and agency and all those things in your classrooms and math. So check out the handout. Hopefully that is helpful to you in trying this out in your classrooms.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. We know we only have a couple, 2 minutes left, but we also, take baby steps is what I would say. Putting just student names and staff names inside of word problems is just instant way to engage students. And we have on our handout lots of resources for you to explore before the school year begins. And just to let you know, it's not always called numberless word problems. They're the exact same framework. Sometimes it's called 3-act task. So if you come across a resource like that, which we have in our handout for you, that's the same thing. It's the same idea, same instructional strategy of sense making before asking children to do the reasoning, the mathematical reasoning. Thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to share this routine with you. If you have any last minute questions or I don't know, anything that you think would be important to share, any clarifications, don't hesitate to ask. And I think our email will be in the handout that will be posted on the website as well. So
Colleen is asking where the handout is. It's on the website, right?
It'll I think by the end of today, it'll be linked to the website. So the recording will be a recording of this session will be there. Our handout will be there. And one more thing will be there that I can't remember it. But those are the two most important things. The handout, the PowerPoint, and the recording. So you'll have access to all of those. You just go on the Early Math Project website, click on today's conference, and then you'll see a picture of Sisa and I with this session sort of info, and that's where you can find all the resources. But yeah, we curated a really good list for you all. We thought carefully about what would someone really need to know as they're starting this out. There's a podcast in there that I highly recommend. There's the book that we referenced of Dr. Kindle, Equity in Math, that is I can't wait to go deeper into this summer. So we hope you guys find them useful.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the symposium.